Hello, Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome from wherever you're joining today. My name is Susan, and I'm joined by the amazing Dexibit founder, Angie Judge. Welcome, Angie.
Hi, Susan. Happy New Year, everybody.
Today, we're going to be talking all about benchmarking for visitor attractions. We're really excited to share this new benchmarking data with you, but to begin with, I will take you through a quick introduction to Dexibit for anyone that may be new here. So if you're new to Dexibit, we do data analytics specifically for visitor attractions. This is for both cultural and commercial organizations. Our mission is to democratize data, and we do that by bringing together all sorts of data from around the visitor's experience in your venue's operations. So things like footfall, ticketing, CRM, point of sale, e-commerce, social web, and weather. I will share my screen now to show you what that looks like in the product. So here is Dexibit. It is software as a service. You can invite as many users as you'd like, and you can build dashboards, reports, insights, and forecasts, which you can then turn into scheduled email reports at a click of a button. And in Dexibit, we have a huge library of visualizations. To add one to your dashboard, you can simply search for the topic you're looking for and click Add to add it in. And this is an example dashboard, so you can see lots of different data coming together in these visualizations to get everything from very high-level data right down through to the very detailed data. So I'll hand it over to Angie now, who will take us through benchmarks for visitation, pricing, and admission, and visitor feedback. To start us off, Angie, could you tell us how much visitation grew in the past year?
Sure. And the grand answer to that is 5% across industry for Dexibit's visitor attraction customers. So a global data set, a mixture of cultural and commercial attractions in there, crossing lots of different segments. So museums, galleries, zoos, aquariums, parks, gardens, theme parks, location-based, family entertainment, all sorts of things wrapped up in there, and a wide variety of sizes too. So anywhere from kind of sub 100,000 visitors all the way through to the 10 million plus bracket. So a wide range across the industry. And interestingly, our customers, when we look at this data and the visitation growth index from Dexibit, they tend to track at a higher growth rate than the rest of the industry. So last year, I think the numbers were something like 30% growth year on year for Dexibit's customers, and that was 19 points across the wider industry data sets that we pull for visitation for those that aren't with Dexibit. And so this year, I think when we look, it'll probably be around about July before we see all of the other visitor attractions start to publicly publish their numbers for those that do, whether that's through earnings reports from public companies or some of the publicly owned or nonprofit institutions that publish their annual reports with visitation numbers in there. We're expecting that because that Dexibit index tends to be higher than industry, that when those full industry numbers come out, it'll actually be even flatter, even negative in industry growth. And we have seen that in the likes of like Disney, for example, and SeaWorld or United Parks, when they've been publishing their quarterly earnings calls, that they have been talking about declining attendance in 2024. So a really interesting trend there. But let's take a look and dive into the data and we'll see what this looks like. And so we have just released a whole pile of fresh and new benchmarks into Dexibit. So if you are using Dexibit, come into your dashboards menu here. So this big blue button at the top left, and you'll find there's a bunch of benchmarking dashboards that you'll see in there with the little Ferrari race car or whatever brand that is sitting at the top there. So lots of different topics, and we'll cover some of these today. The data behind these is twofold. So first of all, there is Dexibit's index data. So this is taken from across our data set. It is a real mixture of visitor attractions here. It's designed to provide you with a real-time, very granular pulse on what's happening into industry. And then to supplement that, we also have gathered together publicly available data, so published data. So that's the likes of what visitor attractions put on their own websites, for example. That data, of course, tends to lag quite a bit. But you have that so that you can also then explore a wider range of the industry, sample it how you'd like, and we also tell you at that point who those attractions are, because that data is public, versus the data that we share from within Dexibit is only indexes, so things like growth rates and conversions. It's aggregate, very anonymized, so that it can't be sort of traced back to its source and things, to protect our customers' confidentiality and privacy. So we've got both data sets to play with, one with the benefit of being that real-time and very granular, but anonymized and aggregate, and the other one being very defined, published, named data, but with the downside of it being laggy and often more high level. So usually, for example, it'll just be annual visitation that most people publish versus the index, which goes all the way down to the day. So to start to have a look into these, let's start with visitation and in particular growth, because this is the big question on everybody's lips as we're doing 2024 year in review reports in January here, 25, is what we're experiencing normal, because everybody's had a really mixed bag of the year, and we can see that in that growth rate. So here is our first benchmark data set. So this is the visitation index, growth index from Dexibit. You've got a couple of different data points within here to look at year-on-year growth, either on an annual basis or a monthly basis. And it's been a really mixed year as well. The year actually started off really strongly through the beginning. So January, February, March, everybody was off to the races with some good growth. Things came crashing down in April, where the median rates have dropped to minus 10% year-on-year growth for the month of April. And we saw a similar effect in December. Now, these months in 2024, of course, had 5 weekends rather than 4 weekends. So this isn't an unusual or an unexpected thing. But April kind of marked the beginning of some quite flat to negative growth that continued on through that quarter. And things started to pick up a little bit in September, but never got back to those highs earlier in the year. So as far as the year goes, that was quite a mixed bag in itself. And we saw actually in the Northern Hemisphere, things were a little bit chunkier and lower still, where the Southern Hemisphere tended to fare better, and perhaps during that June, July period, especially, where it's actually their winter season rather than the highs of the summer. And so as we wait to see 2024's data in publicly published data from other visitor attractions, we expect that this sort of trend of compound annual growth rate to continue sort of flattening out as we sort of get away from the post-pandemic recovery, potentially some of that pent-up demand that was happening in 2022, even over into 2023. As we come into 24, 25 as well. And we can see some of the impact on that through different regions and different segments of the visitor attraction industry. So again, everything's sort of normalizing into post-COVID. So it'll be really interesting to see once this data publicly publishes from different visitor attractions, which we expect around about that July period. So if you'd like to take a look at that, we've put that all into this benchmarks dashboard. This will be in your account in Dexibit if you're following along, and you can explore the data set of how many attractions are in there and what nature they are and things like that, and get down to the individual data points. So that's just a really quick little look into what's happening in terms of growth and the wider picture around visitation. But there's a couple of other things that could be interesting to have a look at today that we'll get into. The first is admission and annual pricing. So another one of these benchmarks that we've just released for the end of 2024 is some pricing indexes So again, this is largely leaning on publicly published data from visitor attractions' own websites. And there's lots and lots of interesting metrics here. So this is the benchmark pricing data set. Again, this dashboard will be in your account if you're with Dexibit. So you can see everything from admission prices, annual membership or season pass prices, the different discounts that are available for retail and food and beverage within those benefits. In this case, what age typically that the attraction is offering admission free under. So you can come free when you're under 2 or under 10 or whatever that number might be. And the difference between the pricing tables of say adult versus child, who's doing dynamic pricing versus fixed versus variable, etc. So again, a really, really big, juicy data set here to get into for benchmarking. So I really hope you enjoy that. So some interesting things out of here, just to spotlight these for 2024. When you're doing your year in review, as pricing, of course, has been increasing the last couple of years. We have been in some fairly inflationary environments, economically speaking, in most countries. And we're leveling out here at the moment to around about $35. This is for US market and US dollars for zoos and aquariums. We are seeing the UK slightly behind that when we account for currency, so sitting around about the $30 mark, and then Australasia sitting slightly further behind as well. We can see here the same in museums and galleries, sitting at $25. So this is a really interesting push that we're sort of really getting through those thresholds of into the $20 for museums and galleries, and we're heading north towards the $30 mark there, which will be curious to see. And amusement and entertainment, this is a tricky sector because, of course, we vary quite widely here, all the way up to sort of the Disney park passes, which are much more expensive than, say, going to a location-based experience. But here we're pushing up into the well up into the 60s here as that levels out. And where this becomes really interesting is when you start looking at the ratios of how that compares to annual pricing and sort of the number of sort of average number of times you need to visit to make those annual passes worthwhile. So interesting here, your best value for money is coming out of the parks, gardens, estates and landmarks sector, followed by museums and galleries. So zoos and aquariums sitting around about 3.0 times to return your value on an annual pass. So have fun exploring this data set. This is one of my favorites, pricing, and lots of great goodness in there to go after and deep dive into as you're looking at how your pricing compares and what your plans are for your pricing strategies in 2025. And then next, we're coming into voice of the visitor. So again, this is public data rather than coming from the visitor attraction's own website. This is coming from public sources and from things like reviews. And we are using Dexibit's AI on top of these to look at things like sentiment and emotion and themes and topics and complaint levels to help interpret those visitor reviews into remarks and then into quantitative data. And if you are with Dexibit, again, this benchmark dashboard will be in your user accounts. And also, if you haven't done it already, Voice of the Visitor is a great add-on to put into your reviews data so that you can sort of apply this AI technology across your visitors' remarks as well to turn that qualitative feedback into quantitative data. So you can apply that to any free-form visitor remark, whether that's reviews, visitor evaluation or surveys, free-form comments like compliments, complaints, questions, inquiries and things like that. So really exciting stuff and such fun data to play with. So interestingly here, one of the really big standouts that I want to start with is have a look at this decline in the average rating of visitor happiness. So this is stars out of 5, coming down and down and down, especially having that real crash in 2022. all the way down from 4.73 to 4.6. Now, this might seem a little bit of a dramatic axis, given that we're only talking about like just over 1.1 of a point. But in terms of 5-star review ratings, this is actually a huge number. At the moment, this is the difference between median and the top quartile of the industry. So statistically, it's quite significant. And this crash in 22, when we look at the data, is likely a result of sort of all of the shipping constraints, staffing turnover issues, rising prices, all of these sorts of things that happen post-COVID, which interestingly leveled out in 2023. We've ever so slightly pulled back, nothing really that notable right now to notice, but things are continuing to sort of establish a new normal of visitor expectations and visitor happiness post that COVID period. So I think that that's really fascinating. The other interesting thing is that actually the number of 5-star reviews has actually increased. So we used to say back a couple of years ago that the benchmark to hit was that 77% of your reviews should be 5-star, and these days it's more like over 78% of them should be 5-star. Again, we're talking about 1 percentage point, but in terms of reviews, it's quite significant. And what that's telling us is that those are also becoming slightly more polarized as well, which is an interesting phenomenon. So if you're looking for your benchmark, here are your numbers if you wanted to grab a quick screenshot today. 4.61 is the median. So if you're above that level in terms of your average star review rating, you're in good shape. But things look slightly different when we come into different sectors. And in particular, you can see if you're in, say, something like museums and galleries or parks and gardens, you're actually needing to go a bit higher to keep up with the average for your industry, versus if you're in amusement and entertainment or in zoos and aquariums, you can see that actually the average level of visitor happiness is a lot lower for those segments. So really interesting to see quite how dramatically, again, these are quite significant numbers when we're looking at 5-star review ratings, how significantly they differ between these different segments. And what else can I show you that's really interesting? Here we've got some interesting, when we start to get into this AI, so providing things like theme and topic and sentiment, etc., on top of these remarks, we start to see how what visitors are talking about breaks down for industry. So commonly when we look at voice of the visitor experience will by far be the dominant theme that comes up. These are the common themes that we recommend an attraction looks for. And within that, lots of different topics that relate to the visitor experience, given that's such a wide area as well to pick up on. We can see here, for example, another interesting one is coming up in terms of pricing. So around 7% of visitor remarks in the sample data that we took here about pricing. And we can see some similar things when we talk about topics. So the difference between a theme and a topic, a theme is kind of the broad brush motif, if you like, of the remark, and the topic is sort of the individually identified subject heading of that, which tends to be almost unique, but not quite. So we can see here how that starts to break down. There are a gazillion of these topics across this data set, but these are the top ones that come up when we look at things more generally. What we can do is start to, there are just endless ways that you can interpret this data and slice and dice it to come up with interesting insights. But for example, what we can do is start to look at maybe reducing, I should write my query properly or use my magic wand. There we go. Reducing these top topics down to ones that are within the realm of the theme of accessibility. And here we start to see some really interesting things around, say, for example, ease of access and wheelchair accessibility being really important. And one thing I think also that's coming up here, as a parent, this one resonates for me. When we talk about accessibility and voice of the visitor, actually stroller accessibility is another really common one that comes up, and it's not typically something that we naturally think about when we think about accessibility. So important to think about all of those different audiences that are impacted by experience design for accessibility. So lots of really cool things to do in terms of slicing and dicing and filtering this data set. If you want to look at your particular geography, your particular segment of the industry into different themes and topics and so forth. And speaking of which, one of the things that I think is quite curious, if we look here at non-positive topics by category, so quite typically we will filter down for, you can see here, sentiment is not positive, so that we are looking at the more actionable feedback from visitors. And interestingly here, value for money is this big purple one on the amusement and entertainment area. You can see this is one of the really big factors that starts to draw back. If you recall, when we looked at overall visitor happiness, that 5-star rating was lowest in amusement and entertainment sector. That value for money feedback is one of the key themes that is really pulling that rating down, which is really interesting. Another one of my favorites, having a look at sentiment by theme here, and just interesting to note the sort of percentage of negative remarks. And we can see that too here in complaints by themes, that maintenance remains one of the top areas, which is common for complaints for visitor attractions here. So an interesting thing to notice how prevalent that is across industry and how much it's noticed by visitors, which is quite curious. That maintenance topic, of course, can be both capital maintenance, so things like, I don't know, roof needs replacing, versus operational maintenance, so things like a restroom needs cleaning. But yeah, very, very much something that's top of mind for visitors when it's looking at their complaints. So lots of really interesting things here to explore. We hope you have a lot of fun with playing with this data and getting some really great insights to complement your reports. A reminder, here on the top blue menu is where you'll find all of those dashboards. They are, of course, also in the visualization library, so just search for benchmarking and you'll find those there. If you want to add them to your own dashboards, you can explore the data sets as well. And a quick little extra for Dexibit customers who are listening into this, that benchmarking feature you can also apply to your own data set too. So how to do that is when you're working with multiple data sets, so you've got a data set that you want to plot and then a data set that you want to benchmark or compare to. This could be a data set of your own. This could be something like retail data, so you're wanting to look at your different sales performance for your staff and plot them against it. When you're working with a multiple data set cog here, you'll see that comparison type of benchmark, and what that will do is apply a benchmark to your secondary data set. So it will start to look at your top range, your interquartile, and your median, so you can start to use that to benchmark yourself against yourself. So a really useful thing, particularly if you've got multiple locations, for example, and you're wanting to see what that benchmark is across those locations, but equally can apply into any other data set. If you're looking for some help material, of course, back here on support.dexibit.com, you'll find lots of good stuff about those benchmarks themselves. And at blog.dexibit.com, you'll see a whole pile of resources here, and we'll be publishing more and adding more data to these benchmarks as well over the first few months of this year. So the first sort of article here we've got is a quick look at 2024 in review and what's happening for 2025. It'll be an interesting year. We published this just a few days ago. And of course, these extreme weather and fire events are unfortunately already starting to bite for our friends over in LA, and our thoughts are with them today. And on that note, we shall start to wrap up. If you do have any questions, feel welcome to add them into the chat, or if you think of one afterwards, feel welcome to reach out to us. Susan, anything that's coming through?
Yeah, we've got one question. If you could just remind us when the benchmark dashboards will be updated.
So the data sets that support these benchmarks operate on different cadences. So the Dexibit growth index that we looked at is real time, so it updates all the time so that you can see each month how your month-on-month growth, or year-on-year growth by month, I should say, is comparing. So it's something that you can use as a KPI to track your performance with throughout the year. When it comes to the public data, we update that as it's available in industry. So usually it takes about 6 months for industry to publish those data sets on their sort of prior year visitation. So oftentimes we'll look for like a end of year annual report that will come out around about that sort of July reporting period to pull that data from. And then the other data, pricing data, is something that we'll be updating every so often as snapshots, as pricing changes, given it is relatively fixed through the year. And then on Voice of the Visitor, we'll be updating that every so often, just so we can maintain how that's pulsing from time to time through the course of the year. So we'll definitely stay tuned for those. We'll also be adding lots of different visitor attractions to all of those data sets. So we intend to grow those benchmarking data sets, particularly in the course of the next couple of months. So you'll be able to check in and see how those are expanding. If there are any groups or communities watching this that want to participate in sort of rolling out benchmarks across their group, like an association, for example, we'd love to chat more with those as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Angie, and thank you for everyone who's joined today. We look forward to seeing you next month.
Thanks, everybody.